I don't have time for proper introduction, I'm already late to the party. Let's get into this nonsense. Another Olympic season. Yay! We can marvel as athletes from all around the world gather to show off their skills and compete in the largest and most prestigious sport event in human history, to ruin their bodies and futures for our free entertainment, and for governments to burn billions of dollars in a prestige project just to abandon it afterwards. A truly uncontroversial show of international unity. Now, anyway, the Olympics. The Olympic Games, despite their seeming popularity and undeniable place in pop culture, was always a sticky affair. From being a place for dictators to show off and legitimize their terrible rule, to being a black hole for public funds. Now, as you probably, hopefully, know, nations usually show up with a bunch of people to compete, and Russia is a nation. However, Russia's relationship with the Olympics was always tenuous at best. Major doping scandals, arresting athletes to use as political bargaining chips, using their teams to launder money and give out to their oligarchs, sending state-sponsored troublemakers to incite riots in host countries, and the disastrous propaganda stunt that was the Sochi Winter Olympics. Russia always seemed to stir trouble whenever it is around the Olympic Games. This year is no different. Now, Russian state-sponsored disinformation campaigns and agitation is not really new, it is sort of part of our everyday lives now. However, the Olympics are special for them, especially as they wage a genocidal war of imperialist aggression against their neighbor, and as elections come in Western democracies, among them countries which are key backers of Ukraine. This is a critical time for them to sow division, support far-right politicians, and push the public discourse away from their shady dealings. So, in this hopefully quick video, let's talk about Russia's recent dealings. France is no stranger to acts of Russian subterfuge, and now the Olympics, where Russia is banned from, is the perfect opportunity for Russia to sow some chaos. Immediately as the Olympics began, a wave of sabotage hit French telecommunication networks and railways, which served to make communication and transportation for the Olympics difficult. Though there are several proposed suspects, it is telling that one of the first people to be arrested on suspicion on the attempted large-scale destabilization of the Games and the country was a guy named Kirill Gryaznov, who allegedly acted on the orders of Russian intelligence agencies. This wouldn't be the first time Russia does something there. Previously, Russia performed several propaganda stunts in France, like the time when they laid coffins in front of the Eiffel Tower covered in French flags and signs saying "French soldiers in Ukraine," in response to a French proposal to send French trainers and possibly security troops to Ukraine. These acts serve different purposes depending on its audiences. For Westerners and the French people, these serve to sow chaos, make people afraid and disrupt their lives, to undermine the trust in democracy and their current leaders, and as distraction so people talk about this and bicker about it rather than discuss how Russia is threatening them, and to artificially create disunity, disguising these acts as citizens' actions rather than coordinated efforts by Russian intelligence agencies to weaken France. To Putin's crowd, conservative audiences outside of Russia, and specifically the Russian people, these stunts are televised as examples of how the West is weak, falling, and unstable compared to the mighty Russian bear, and hopefully make them look in the other direction whenever violence rates, poverty, inequality, and declining public services in Russia starts to make the country comparable to your average third-world developing nation. But let's get to the Olympics. The opening ceremony. A glorious display of wasted taxpayer money. I mean pomp, glory, and prestige, of course. The French parade was alright, I guess, with shows, displays, and a day's worth of festivities for the Olympian crowd to marvel at. However, on the halls of the internet, conversations slowly started to focus on a single few minutes of the long event that, by the virtue of thin-skinned snowflakes and Russian bot farms, for many became the opening ceremony. It was an act that was meant to evoke Greek pagan imagery, specifically Dionysus, the Greek god of wine and parties. To the ordinary person, of course, this doesn't particularly stand out, especially considering the Greek pagan origins of the Olympic Games. However, to a certain culture or supercharged segment of society, it was considered to be actually a mockery of the Last Supper. Of course, it was not just the Ruskies, as American conservative swastik Christians don't necessarily need outside encouragement to be mind-meltingly stupid, but it is telling how hard Russian bots push this nonsense. Naturally, Russian bots are not all-powerful. They would like to be, but they ain't. They wouldn't work without an audience, without platforms accommodating their nonsense where they can freely poison the conversation. Luckily, they can easily find it, from badly moderated social media platforms permitting it to major mainstream media platforms, politicians actively pushing it, either for their own delusions or because they are spineless grifters who want to profit off lies and the suffering of others. Now, queer or pagan evoking imagery on the Olympics is nothing new, to which there is some whining every time. But this year's conservative circle jerk was absolutely a product of artificially crafted cultural outrage, which is new. It didn't take long to make up even more nonsense when the immediate things became uninteresting, like how allegedly one of the performers had their scrotum hanging out from their pants, while it was very clearly just their thigh that was seen through the stockings they were wearing, filmed from a weird angle. Of course, truth doesn't matter to the culture warriors who seek every opportunity to be outraged, and the pundits catering to them are happy to oblige, no matter the cost. It will be out of the news cycle and irrelevant long before it is properly debunked. They just move on to the next. Lies travel the world around twice before the truth even ties its shoes. It didn't take long for them to find the new thing to be mad about. The story they jumped on right after this one was really the reason why this video came to be in the first place. An Italian boxer named Angela Carini tapped out of a box match after just 46 seconds. Her face and alleged cries of unfairness resounded through the halls of the internet, claiming that her opponent, Iman Khelif, was actually a man or trans woman with unfair advantage on their opponent. It is really interesting what she allegedly said changes with each retelling, at one point going to the point of saving her own life from the vicious assault of a man. Whatever is more anger and click evoking, I guess. Given how the target of the culture war is trans issues mainly nowadays, this was picked up fast and it was an absolute fucking shit show. A deluge of posts and information hit every possible site and page, and in the hotly contested topic, transphobia festered. In the chaos, major and generally reputable news sites messed up and reported that the athlete indeed was born with XY chromosomes, and even places which I considered fairly open-minded, intellectual, and liberal started behaving like your average 15-year-old fascist who thinks saying the F word is cool. It was difficult at first to trace it back, and I admit to have struggled at first to figure out what is actually going on, believing some third-hand reports about DSD, Swear syndrome, and a healthy dose of public non-understanding of how biology was being culprits. It was both funny and morbid seeing how the transphobic horde, which is so hyper-focused on genitalia determining someone's sex that they are all too eager to even order penis inspection days for children, argue that just because Iman Khelif was born as a cis woman and had female genitalia, she's most certainly a man because of a possible Y chromosome and high testosterone. Once again, the culture warriors, and sadly a lot of ordinary people, have demonstrated that they are susceptible towards manufactured outrage and have no idea about biology beyond elementary school level biology. Like, it gone to the fucking point where the fact that Iman Khelif was like a strongly built woman, they started saying that she's actually a man because they haven't seen a strong woman before. Even with this, however, what I and many others didn't realize at first was how deep was this story actually made up. The answer is basically every aspect of it, and every story that built on it were built on either complete fabrications or very, very faulty assumptions. So I wish to clean it up here a little bit. First of all, no. Iman Khelif is not a man. That one is clear right off the bat. She's a cis woman born in Algeria, where there is no transition and the Olympics practically don't allow trans women to compete in fighting sports, and basically no other sports either. Given her background, it was basically impossible for her to be trans or be biologically born male. Now, the Y chromosome could have been true and her competing would have still been legal. There are a wide range of genetic diseases and syndromes that complicate the human sexual development, which includes the likes of Swear syndrome, a disease which causes you to have a non-functioning Y chromosome, basically. So, no, biological sex is much more complicated than 46XY and 46XX, but that is neither in the scope of this video nor sufficiently in the boundaries of my knowledge to accurately explain. All of this is irrelevant, however, because there is absolutely no evidence to suggest that she has a Y chromosome. The origins of this is an article published on the 25th of March 2024 on TASS, a Russian state-owned propaganda channel, quoting Umar Kremlev, the president of the International Boxing Association, or IBA. In this interview, Mr. Kremlev claimed that, without any proof whatsoever by the way, that a previous disqualification of Iman Khalif was because they performed a genetic test on her and it came out that she had a Y chromosome. This disqualification happened during the IBA Women's Boxing World Championship in New Delhi in 2023 after Khalif already went through several rounds, including one 3 days before the disqualification, where she beat the upcoming Russian boxing star Azalia Amineva. Amineva was previously unbeaten and the disqualification retroactively restored her unbeaten status. Very curious and very not suspicious if you ask me. During that disqualification, the only reason cited for her and her fellow boxer Lin Yu Thing's disqualification was that they failed an unspecified test. Now, tests like these are confidential medical information. They could not be published and such statements as these could not be made, something which they actually deliberately capitalized on, defending themselves from demands of proof that they can't possibly show confidential documents and washing their hands. This is deliberate. They have already, without much effort or proof, poisoned public discussion. All they have to do is just sit back. They even made a very strange statement regarding the issue, in vague terms describing that they have made no testosterone tests. Another claim made against Khalif was that she failed a testosterone test too, instead saying it was some vague recognized test by a so-called independent laboratory. Strangely, they specifically say it was conducted during both the 2022 Istanbul and 2023 New Delhi Championship. It is strange because Khalif competed in both and she was only disqualified in the middle of the second one. Permit me to be skeptical about the claim that they only got the results down the line while Khalif was already competing, because they allowed her to compete a year before and she was, to my knowledge, never been disqualified out of any other championship, including another Olympics game, Arabian, African and Mediterranean championships, as well as a host of others. To top it all off, the International Olympic Association, or IOC, came out with its own statement calling the previous disqualification sudden and without any due process, and that it was a decision made solely by the IBA Secretary General and CEO. It will probably not surprise you that the IBA was disqualified from the Olympics for corruption in 2019, a decision reinforced by the Court of Arbitration for Sport. It has to be also mentioned that Russia and Russian-aligned assets have a big stake in the association, so much so that during the 2022 invasion of Ukraine, the IBA summarily banned Ukraine from participating. Now, let me be clear. Khalif is under no obligation to publish her private healthcare record. It is private for a reason, and the burden of proof is not on her. The IBA statement also mentions how Lin and Dimen didn't appeal or withdraw their appeal to the CAS, the Court of Arbitration for Sport. However, this is completely irrelevant to the debate whether or not Khalif has a Y chromosome. There could be a variety of reasons for not suing them, including not being able to pay the costs, being told that not to do it because it could potentially hurt their careers, or simply not wanting to bother because they are sports people. They are not here to sue, they are here to play. What is clear, however, is that facts don't matter to the outrage machine. If there is no proof, they will just invent their own, such as pointing to random wrinkles on her shorts in still images and saying that she has a penis, making it up that she said it in an interview that she was a boy in her childhood, even though she never said that, relying on the average person not knowing Algerian Arabic, claiming that for some reason women don't wear groin protection, which I think is a very oddly elaborate way of saying that you don't know how to please a woman, my guy, or my personal favorite, I looked at her and she doesn't look feminine enough, therefore she's a man, which is like, bruh, have you never seen a tomboy before? You go to any city bars which is frequented by artists and philosophy uni students, and you will see 3 women that are just like her, and if you're lucky enough, one of them is bisexual and not lesbian, and you might just have a shot with them. Fuck! On a more serious note, addressing trans people in this whole situation, this deluge of hatred really tells us how this whole conversation is completely tainted by transphobic propaganda. As I have mentioned before, even places I never expected to go ballistic against trans people on Russian propaganda basically just did that, even though she's not even trans and most suggestions hovered around her being possibly intersex. And this whole thing is a very clear example of made-up culture where outrage designed solely to make you angry. To be absolutely clear, I do think that there should be a conversation about where the place of trans people is within sports to keep it fair for everyone involved. The problem is that this is absolutely not it. This is a culture war nonsense which is betrayed by where it focuses the most. To be brief, regardless of whether or not trans athletes actually have an unfair advantage or not, a trans athlete can lose 100 matches and win a single one, and it still will be said that they have an unfair advantage. Especially trans women, because trans people more or less been in sports openly for nearly 50 years now, and they conspicuously aren't dominating their categories and the world records. There are very few trans people, and even fewer trans athletes to begin with, but even among them, the mockery and the attack very specifically goes against trans women most of the time, especially if they win a single match. Suddenly everybody is concerned with the so-called fairness in women's sports, even if what is claimed is mostly bullshit. Leah Thomas, I think, is an interesting case study in this particular instance. She has won a single match on a single tournament, lost basically all others, even when she won her time was nothing special and was beaten on that very tournament, yet she was relentlessly harassed and wide-ranging bans were put in place by conservatives on trans athletes, often with the tacit silence of liberals, to combat a fairness issue, the existence of which was not proven by any of the data at hand. Something that gets even more suspicious when trans men and non-binary athletes like Chris Mosier and Quinn score Olympic golds and the conservative hatred machine is just silent. This went as far as claiming that transition happened specifically to be competitive in sports, which is completely made up and there is absolutely no evidence that people do this. To be clear, my point is that these artificially fabricated moral panics have nothing to do with fairness in sport or proper conversations, but are deeply rooted in oppression of sexual minorities, arbitrary discrimination, political fear-mongering, and society-wide patriarchal misogyny. There should be research and a proper conversation, because this topic, especially given how few trans athletes are there, is in fact underdeveloped. There are many unknowns and possible problems to be worked out, but trans people are human, a tiny minority of humans who just want to live their lives normally and participate in the same things as everybody else. They have no power or actual willingness to propagate or shout down some kind of ideology on the throat of everyday people and children in schools. They shouldn't be outright excluded. There should be research for ways where they could be included instead of excuses being made up to be excluded. An exclusionary society is the bane of sentient existence and progress. As for the Russian propaganda machine, they don't care. They take any topic that is divisive and run with it. Today it is trans people, yesterday it was Texas exiting the US, tomorrow it could be anything. It's anyone's guess, really. They can't win otherwise, and the United Democratic West is their worst nightmare. They wish you to support them, or at least stand aside when they try to dismantle democracy, oppress populations, and invade their neighbors, and they will continue to do so. They fabricate stories, poison public discourse, and flood the internet with disinformation. They do it now, they did it before, and if we let them, they will do it in the future. Thank you for sticking around. If you like my content, like and subscribe. I was Kane, and I know all of the secrets of the universe, but I'm too lazy to talk about them.